before sunrise on a mild summer morning in June 1995. A 27-year-old television news anchor named Jodi hurriedly left her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, headed for work. But she never arrived, and her disappearance has never been solved. In 2003, two television news reporters created FindJodi.com, a website dedicated to preserving Jodi's memory and keeping her case alive. This is the official Find Jodi podcast. Thank you for downloading the Find Jodi podcast. I'm Scott Fuller. We appreciate the positive feedback on the podcast so far. Keep telling your friends, keep sharing and subscribing and spreading the word about Jodi's case through the podcast and FindJodi.com. As a reminder, since our last episode, here's a little bit of what's happened so far.
She spent Friday and Saturday until Sunday morning in Iowa City water skiing with several friends. She got off the noon show because she was going to participate in a Chamber of Commerce golf tournament.
Jodi walked a few steps to a stairwell and walked down the stairs into a small entrance area of the apartment building.
Somebody had been waiting for her.
Yeah, it was a white Ford van is what I seen. Parked right there with the parking lights on.
They noticed prior to Jodi's disappearance that there were beer cans lined up on a little ridge by the parking space where you could see Jodi's apartment.
It was weird because nobody parked on the street.
Her personal items are strewn all over the area of her parked car. There are obvious signs of a struggle.
We're basically left to speculation. Over the years, there's been very little information publicly released.
On the first episode of the Find Jodi podcast, we outline the timeline of events leading up to the abduction of television news anchor Jodi on June 27, 1995. Jodi was scheduled to be at work between 3 and 4 a.m. that morning, but she'd overslept. A coworker called Jodi to wake her, and at 4:10 a.m., Jodi told her coworker on the phone that she'd be right in. But Jodi was never seen or heard from again. Police were called after 7 a.m. and arrived at Jodi's sports car parked in the parking lot to find belongings of her purse strewn across the ground, and there was no sign of Jodi. That's where we pick up the story this time. In this episode, you'll be hearing from FindJodi.com team members Caroline Lowe and Josh Benson. They each have many years of experience in television news, as well as Jay Alberio, who served as head of investigations for the Woodbury, Minnesota Police Department. Today, we're discussing not only the following minutes and hours of the investigation into Jodi's disappearance, but also the days, weeks, and now years and decades since. Now, if you're just hearing about Jodi's case through this podcast, you might be wondering at this point about people of interest in the investigation. Have police focused on anybody in Jodi's disappearance? And they have. But we're going to save some of those people of interest for later in the podcast series, when we have a chance to spend a little bit more time on each of them and go into each of these people of interest in detail. But there are other circumstances involved that are important to know for Jodi's case too. Some of those circumstances would be faced by investigators in any major case like Jodi's that receives significant press attention and remains unsolved for so long. But some of the other events that take place in this investigation are entirely unique to Jodi's case. We'll be utilizing Caroline and Josh's personal experience in reporting on Jodi's case over the years to help fill you in on those events, and Jay Alberio's investigative expertise will help us navigate some of the procedural elements involved. On the day of Jodi's disappearance, as police were still processing the scene of Jodi's abduction in the parking lot of her apartment complex in Mason City, Iowa, a search effort of the surrounding area began. The initial search efforts were focused on the Winnebago River, which runs directly behind the apartment complex, and also a large public park across the river. Here's Jay.
So first of all, they're looking to see, was she abducted and dragged off to a nearby area and assaulted or killed? So you want to focus on those close proximity areas. You're looking for evidence. You're looking for, unfortunately, maybe the body, anything that might give you clues or direction of where to take that investigation. And as time goes on, then you start expanding your circle of that investigation. So the area, you're going to widen it and keep going out further until you've exhausted all your means. So immediately you would want to put out to like an all points bulletin to the entire area, even the entire state, especially as you expanded that search. You don't find anything in close proximity. You're searching out further and further. So you also then at that time want to reach out to counties nearby and to the whole state wide. And I would assume Mason City being close to the Minnesota border that you'd also alert the Minnesota authorities and any other nearby states in case somebody's traveling. We make a traffic stop, somebody's acting suspicious, looking over their shoulder, looking maybe towards the trunk of the car or the back seat. That would would pique your interest maybe to investigate that further. So, and yes, in this case, we don't know the timeline of when they put out a statewide alert.
When do you loop the FBI in when it comes to a kidnapping, and how does that process work?
In our typical case here in Minnesota, normally smaller agencies would call the state. And they have a lot of resources. They have the resources for processing the scene, evidence collection, investigative techniques, interviews that you're going to need in a major case like that. Maybe later you'll call in the FBI. So it's kind of maybe a 2 or 3 step process. You got the city. Some cities may call in the county, and then county will bring in the state, and then the federal level.
And obviously, the initial law enforcement search for Jodi Huisentruit or any sign of her was unsuccessful. But that first search would by no means be the last.
It started as a small effort by friends and family, but tomorrow hundreds of people are expected to join in a new search for missing television anchorwoman Jodi Huisentruit. KARE 11's Dave Wildemuth is live in Mason City tonight with the story. David?
Well, Paul, the last real shoulder-to-shoulder search happened almost a year ago, right here outside of Jodi's apartment in Mason City, Iowa. That was done by police. This one tomorrow will all be amateurs, friends and family members of Jodi who say that they're just tired of and frustrated of sitting on their hands. As you said, this effort has really grown exponentially. It started out as about a dozen people who were going to come down here and help. Now we're told that they are expecting as many as 200 people tomorrow morning. Now they have come up with 19 target areas that will be searched tomorrow. Most of them are wildlife settings and ditches. And friends of Jodi say if nothing else, it gets the story back in the news and it gives them the satisfaction of just doing something.
In all of the official and unofficial searches for Jodi or any sign of what happened to her that morning, nothing has been found. The Jodi Huisentruit investigation, over 25 years now, has naturally spanned several chiefs of police and administrations in Mason City. Several investigators will tell you about in this episode have worked the case from 1995 nearly up to the present day, but others were only involved for a short time. Probably partly because of the turnover that would occur in any agency over that period of time, different investigators on Jodi's case have given seemingly contradictory public statements. In other instances, parts of the case file have been revealed publicly one time, but then never confirmed or commented on again. Caroline Lowe will be helping us sort through all of the public statements law enforcement has given over the course of the 25-year investigation into Jodi's disappearance. Coming up next. Caroline Lowe joining us now to break down some of the public comments that have been made by law enforcement in Jodi's case over the years. Some of the messaging on some of the case file has been at times a little bit confusing. Different investigators, different chiefs of police commenting on Jodi's case over the years have said things in different ways, and Caroline has developed a timeline of public statements by police to try to clear up as much of that confusion for us as possible.
I think one of the biggest confusions I've come across over the years is whether or not Jodi may have been stalked, been followed before she was abducted. We do know that several months early, in October of 1994, that a person in a pickup truck had been following Jodi. It concerned her enough that she reported it to police. We've had inconsistent reports over the years about what color that vehicle was. Initially, the police chief said it was black. Years later, in 2004, the lead investigator supervisor said it was white. In more recent years, it's been reported as black. But in any case, there was a pickup truck following Jodi that concerned her enough that she called police. We've also, in more recent years, interviewed some people who were at the Mason City Country Club the day before Jodi disappeared at a golf tournament. And the two people I talked to who were her golf teammates said she'd been receiving some nasty sort of nuisance-type phone calls and that she actually planned to change her phone number the next day. Those are the things we have heard, but the police have pretty strongly early on said they don't believe she was stalked. They don't have letters. They didn't have anything they identified that pointed to a stalker.
There is another misconception in Jodi's case, and this is probably the most important misconception in the entire case, that blood was found somewhere at the scene of Jodi's abduction. For the longest time, police wouldn't confirm one way or another whether blood was found. But eventually, since law enforcement has confirmed, no blood was found at the scene.
For many years, if you look back at articles that were written, TV shows, lots of references to a bloody palm print or blood at the scene. But in fact, in 2013, the two detectives, the supervisor on the case, Terrence Prochaska and Frank Stearns, said in an interview that there was no blood evidence. It's one of the many things that had been erroneously reported over the years and taken as fact, but there was no blood evidence at the scene.
And then there's the palm print.
It's probably one of the key pieces of potential evidence because, as the investigators have said over the years, they have very little evidence. But to actually have a palm print that's unidentified, it's, as far as we know, it's still unidentified. It's a key piece, potentially a key piece of evidence, but it may have nothing to do with it. And we do know over the years a number of people have had their palm prints compared. It's certainly one of the first things they do if somebody's name comes to their attention is to see if they can get a match.
And there's one piece of potential evidence in particular that is especially intriguing. The single strand of hair that one investigator said was collected from the scene of Jodi's abduction. But the hair has never been mentioned by anyone in law enforcement before or since then.
I've only seen one mention of a hair strand. A couple times we've heard the mention of DNA, which was obtained. Never been defined what kind of DNA. We know they have Jodi's DNA. We know they've recovered her hairbrush. Potentially they got DNA from hair on the brush. They have other ways to get it as well. But we don't know for sure on the hair strand. And it's only been mentioned in one report I've seen over the years.
And that was Frank Stearns to Nancy Grace, I think, in 2011. And there's no detail, like where in the scene they found it. Was it inside? Was it outside?
And when Josh and Gary and others over the years have pressed investigators for more details, as Ron Vanderweerd said back in 2004, they have so little, so they feel what little they do have, they don't want to be more specific. It could be something we've seen in many other cases, that there are things that only the perpetrator, the killer, would know. So they obviously don't want to say the location and things like that that might compromise the investigation.
And then there's the white van. Not to be confused with the black or white truck that was following Jodi sometime before she disappeared. This van was seen by a man driving to work that same morning, a man named Randy Linderman. You heard a little bit from him in the last episode of the podcast. Randy Linderman's sighting of a white van in the parking lot of Jodi's apartment complex around that same time that she was abducted was the first major piece of information released to the public about the case. From the Mason City Globe-Gazette on July 2, 1995, or the weekend after the Tuesday morning abduction, Police Chief Jack Schleeper said Saturday the case is now being officially classified as an abduction, and that a mid-1980s white Ford Econoline van is being sought in connection with the investigation.
They spent, I can't imagine, like hundreds of hours trying to find that white van, and nobody came forward with any good theory. They ruled out local newspaper carriers, all the obvious things. So all we have, as far as we know to this day, is one person who said he saw, Randy Linderman, who saw a white van early in the morning, and that's why they went so much off in that direction.
So we obviously, again, don't know if the white van is involved in Jodi's case, but the more you think about it, given the media attention that this case got, don't you think the white van driver might have come forward, him or herself, over the years if it weren't involved?
Exactly. Or you would think they would say something to somebody, but they've never tracked anybody down. Nothing has ever led them to that person. 25 years later, it's still one of the mysteries of this unsolved case.
Our next story comes from Mason City, Iowa, a friendly place, a classic middle American town. They even used it as the model for the town in the movie The Music Man. It's a kind of a place that usually doesn't make the national news. But all that changed this summer when a popular local news anchor named Jodi Huisentruit disappeared.
The Mason City Police Department has established an 800 number for anyone with any information about Jodi's disappearance.
Every time you see a little red car with a little blonde in, you know, you look. We keep hoping.
Channel 5 takes you deeper into the Who's and Truth investigation next week. We have talked extensively with Jodi's family members about their fears and suspicions.
And yet, Mayor, in your area, there have been only 5 murders in the last 8 years. Are people being more careful since Jodi disappeared?
Well, you'd hope so, Penny, and we've had some defense training at one of our fitness centers recently, and they had to expand the class they were going to have to 3 classes because there were so many young women that were interested in defense mechanism to protect themselves.
Since then, the conventional wisdom has been that whoever abducted her would have had to drive north to northeast out of town. That is the fastest way out of town, and the psychics who've been employed to work on this case all agree with that scenario.
Nobody can accuse the investigators of not pursuing all the leads, it looks like, initially in this case, to include some things that raise some eyebrows to some, like psychics.
It's another tool that's out there. You got to follow up on some of the information. A psychic might say that, hey, I have this vision that Jodi was down by the river, or she was wearing this, you know. And if the information they give you is valuable or it's relevant, that maybe they weren't privy to the information, and so when the information they're giving you is spot on or close, you do need to look into those. It's a tough call. Some law enforcement may not reach out to psychics, but psychics might reach out to law enforcement and say, I had a vision. You listen to them and see, is it something that could be followed up on?
Initially, a reward fund was also raised for information leading to answers in Jodi's case. It eventually went unclaimed, but I asked Jay what the introduction of a reward fund can do to both help and hinder an investigation like Jodi's.
You're going to have pros and cons to that. The pros are you have somebody that might be motivated to come forward with the critical information. The biggest cons are you can have false confessions. You can have people just throwing out some bogus information in hopes that they're going to get that reward money. But it does come into play, and it is a big motivating factor with rewards. You know, sometimes the old saying, money talks, that could help.
And then within a few months, with no leads in the case, Jodi's family sought out the services of private investigators to look into the case from the outside.
There's several dynamics that come into play with outside private investigators or detectives getting involved in the case. But you got to still work hand in hand with that person. They may look at friends. They may be able to dig deeper where a detective from the law enforcement perspective may not think that person is any longer a viable suspect, where a private investigator is going to maybe reach out further beyond the scope of that detective's investigation. And a good private investigator would work with law enforcement and say, hey, I've got this information or this lead. Have you followed up on that? Or do you have this information? And they should be sharing that information with law enforcement. The problem you run into is if the private detectives don't share the information with law enforcement, with the investigators assigned to the case, or they're doing duplicate work, or telling people not to contact law enforcement. Because it all is, bottom line is to solve the case. You know, whether you're using private detectives to help or like the FindJodi, boils down to providing information that might help law enforcement solve the case. You know, we here at FindJodi don't want to isolate ourselves, separate us from law enforcement, because really our goal is to, well, keep Jodi's story out there and to help law enforcement to find who's responsible for the abduction of Jodi, to find her, to bring her home. It's really important that the information is shared with law enforcement. Law enforcement is bottom line. They're the ones that are going to be able to prosecute a case if a suspect is identified, to bring it to trial.
As strange as a case like Jodi's can sometimes become when psychics, for example, become a part of the investigation, we had no way of knowing that one of the strangest developments of all in Jodi's case was yet to come. In 2008, a few weeks before another anniversary of Jodi's disappearance was to come and go in June, a reporter for the Mason City Globe-Gazette named Bob Link received a package in the mail. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be a diary. Jodi Huisentruit's personal diary. As Link flipped through the pages, he saw 84 pages of what appeared to be affirmations, mostly encouragement, self-help notes that Jodi seemed to be making to herself. The earliest entries in the journal were dated January 1994, and the last entry was dated Sunday, June 25th, 1995, 2 days before Jodi disappeared. There was no return address, and the envelope bore a Waterloo, Iowa postmark. Someone had anonymously mailed Jodi's journal to a newspaper, which was strange enough, and also, how could such a potentially important piece of possible evidence have been leaked from the police station in the first place? FindJodi co-founder Josh Benson covered these developments as they happened at the time. Josh picks up the story from here.
Talk about a big decision by the Globe-Gazette. They had to decide how they wanted to deal with this sensitive document. They had to have the discussion of, all right, what do we show? How do we control the personal aspect of this? How do we control the investigative aspect? So surely that had to be a very big discussion in the newsroom. I mean, it would have been in our newsroom or any TV newsroom I've ever worked in. It's a very fine balance. But they did end up posting certain excerpts that gave us a look into Jodi's life leading up to her disappearance, some very personal side of her. So I was blown away. I'm like, wait, first of all, crazy that we're looking at this, but how in the world did they get a copy of it? Because I didn't think the police would just give them a copy. I mean, we went to the department several times to say, hey, we'd love to check out some of the evidence in the evidence room, and that was never going to happen. This was one of those things like, how is this even possible? Well, then it turns out, soon thereafter, we find out that the former police chief, David Ellingson, took a copy home with him. He took a copy of the journal home with him after he resigned. Now, he was the police chief up until about August of 2006. That's when he resigned, and that's when he packed everything up and went home. And the chief at the time, Michael Lashbrook, said in reports and through statements that he inadvertently took the copy of the journal when he was clearing out his office after he resigned. So this was, according to police, a big mistake. Now, if you think about it, if you've ever quit a job or resigned or got fired, you just pack up your stuff and you go. You probably don't look through everything before you grab it. And if he's working on investigation, maybe he has paperwork of previous investigations. You know, I could see how that could happen. So now we know how it got there, but how did it get to the Globe-Gazette? And that's when we find out soon thereafter that Cheryl Ellingson, the wife of the police chief, David Ellingson, found the copy and mailed it to the Globe-Gazette. What was going through her mind at the time? Did she panic thinking, we got to do something with this? Did she talk to her husband about it? Did she go to authorities? We don't really know, but all we know is that she sent the copy, or another copy for all we know, to the Globe-Gazette. So a police chief makes a copy, takes it home. The chief's wife sends it to the media, and now it's in the newspaper. At the time, Lashbrook, the chief, was asked, what's the motive here? Why would she even do that? And they said to this day, no motive was given why she sent the copy of the journal to the Globe. I remember at the time, Gary and I called the wife, Cheryl, to ask her. I got hung up on immediately. I think we called her a few times. Just wanted to ask her, hey, what's the scenario? What's the situation? Matter of fact, our team tried recently to reach out to her again. And same thing, got hung up on. So there's no motive as to why she took the copy and mailed it to the Globe. Now, what I didn't know at the time is that Cheryl worked as an employee at the Globe for years before that, maybe 20 years before that. That explains maybe why she sent it to the Globe. But to this day, one of the weirder things that happened in this case, and to this day, nothing happened as a result of it, except that a very sensitive document for an investigation with really no big leads got leaked to the press.
The Mason City Police Department closed the book on that incident, with the journal being mailed to the newspaper by stating in a press release that no laws were broken, and so no charges would be filed. Relatively few entries of the 84 pages of the journal were published by the Mason City Globe-Gazette, and aside from the police and some very few employees at the newspaper, That's the only insight into the journal and Jodi through the journal that we have.
From what we know about Jodi, she was huge into her career. She was working with her agents at Magid to try to work through her delivery. You know, she had that regional accent. You know, I had that for years growing up in Minnesota, the O's and the ahs, yeah, you know, that kind of thing. She said Jodi Huisentruit a lot. She was aware of that and wanted to make sure she could work through that and kind of shake that regional dialect and that sound. So she was actively trying to improve her reel, her on-air presence, her journalism, her reporting. So it wasn't a surprise to see some of that. One of the entries she had early on was, "My number one goal is to get a new job." And that was a personal entry in April of 1995. That was 2 months before she disappeared. So
she was trying to leave Mason City, actively.
Absolutely.
And we know that she'd been talking to managers in other markets.
Yeah, she was talking to somebody in Iowa, kind of a headhunter type person. She had been talking to him, and there was some correspondence between he and Jodi back then. She did have feelers out there to try to figure out how she could make her next move. You know, in one of the entries, you know, "I love news." She wrote that in a 1994 January entry. "Improve my career, make more money, communicate, have more impact on a larger audience, get the Huisentruit name out, make mom proud. I'm not where I want to be." So these are all things that kind of give us a picture of what she was thinking. March of 94, the journal says, "Beginning a new career hunt." She talked about Paul Lazan and Kathy Lee Gifford as role models. They were obviously very big back then. She starts to cover personal things that she did. One in May 31st of 94, she said, "I'm recovering from Memorial Day weekend. Unbelievable. Indy 500, a time of my life. Partied with so many wonderful people. Mario Andretti, world-class racer. Joe Dumars, Detroit Pistons basketball player. And Tim Allen, TV star from Home Improvement. Had an incredible weekend." And with that, there's a picture of some of these celebs that she has. In October, she talked about her mom. They went on a cruise, her mom, Jane. She says, "Mom and I had a super cruise. We had the time of our life. It was just a beautiful time." She shared a story about attending a safety briefing where her mother asked, "Will we have to wear life jackets this whole time that we're here?" So it's just kind of funny to see some of the things that she was doing. And she stayed on top of this like almost daily to where she was making these entries.
There have been strange developments like that, like Jodi's journal being mailed to the newspaper by the wife of a former police chief. Those weird events have surrounded this case pretty much from the beginning, right up until today. Last New Year's Eve, a FindJodi billboard in Mason City that our organization funded in 2018, that billboard was vandalized. 2 people could be seen on gas station video surveillance using a ladder to deface the billboard with spray paint. The vandals painted the name of a longtime Jodi investigator with the Mason City Police Department who had worked the case since the beginning, and alongside the name were 2 words, "machine shed." The image of Jodi's face on the billboard, though, was not vandalized. Mason City Police collected that video surveillance and investigated the incident, but as of this recording, 6 months later, we still don't know who vandalized the FindJodi billboard on Federal in Mason City, or why.
I look at it as a bummer, but I also look at it as like, wow, that's interesting. The billboards are either working or it's just some loser out spray painting billboards, because a lot of discussion was created as a result of that billboard being vandalized.
Could be anything from somebody with a grudge against the police officer, the former officer whose name was spray painted on the billboard with specifics, machine shed, like a place to look for something. Could it be somebody who's responding to our message? That billboard had been up there a year and a half when this happened saying somebody knows something. Is it you? What was that? Was that a clue or was it just simple vandalism? It's a question. It's something I hope was very thoroughly investigated because I don't think you can just automatically dismiss something like that. That was pretty risky. It was done on New Year's Eve, a lot of cars out and about. But again, was it just vandalism or was there something more? We don't know.
Luckily, we got it fixed right away, and they put up another one. We took care of the issue, but yeah, it's one of those things that just drives the discussion.
Discussion. Maybe the one thing that has always been there in Jodi's case. But as we approach the 25th anniversary, which is coming up on Saturday, June 27th, what we still don't have are answers about what happened to Jodi or who took her from her friends, from her family, and from her future. We'll have more to come on Find Jodi's plans to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Jodi's disappearance on the website at FindJodi.com, as well as in audio form here in the podcast feed very soon. And if you have any questions for the team about Jodi's case, maybe a comment you'd like shared with the audience, or a question that you'd like answered in a future episode, you can send those questions to this email address, team@FindJodi.com. That's TEAM@FindJodi.com. Thank you again for the positive feedback we've received from many of you following the first episode of the Find Jodi podcast. You're sharing it with friends and family on social media, and you're taking a moment to leave positive ratings and reviews. It actually helps other people and more people find the podcast, and that's what we're here for. To get Jodi's name and Jodi's story and Jodi's case in front of as many people as possible.
People are forgetting, they're getting older, and the further away we get from that date she disappeared, the harder this case is going to be to solve.
For the entire Find Jodi team, I'm Scott Fuller. Thank you for listening, and there is plenty more on Jodi's case to come.